Hello everyone. Welcome to my HTML5 form tutorial. Today we will be discussing how to create a form, how to embed multiple input options, and how to make an HTML5 form user-friendly. But first, we have to understand what HTML5 forms are and what they are used for. A web form is an HTML element which allows us to receive information from a web visitor by sending the data over to a server for either storage or processing. HTML forms make our websites more interactive and make online surveys as well as login portals possible. They are convenient for web users and helpful to web hosts, since they provide useful information which can be used to improve a site's functionality and appeal. Without such interactivity, the World Wide Web would be much more one-sided, as in favoring web hosts over web users. And just to clarify, we, as web developers, should always strive to make our web pages easy to use, visually appealing, efficient, and lastly, interactive. That is what draws visitors to our websites. Okay. Now back to HTML forms. So, in order to create an HTML form, we need to create an opening and closing form tag, like that. Also, we have to create something called the field set, also with an opening and closing tag. And what field set basically does is it groups related elements or related input fields together, and also draws a box around our form. Now within the field set tags, we're going to create two legend tags like that. And this is basically a caption for our form. So to keep things simple, we're going to name it form number 1. Next, we're going to need labels. Well, an opening and closing label tag. Basically, this is going to describe what is expected in our input field, what is expected of the user to input. So for this, we're going to put first name, and also for input tags, you need something called the for attribute, which basically specifies what input field the label is going to be mapped to. So we're going to name this name. Now we need to create an input tag, and we need to specify a type. So as you can see here, we have many types to choose from: time, date, URL, telephone, color, radio, which basically creates radio buttons, and so on. So here we're going to specify that we want a string, and ID. Again, this needs to map to the for attribute, which is name. Next, we're also going to attach a name attribute, which is helpful because when the information is sent over to a server, it makes it so that it is easier to tell which input belongs to which input query. So we're going to name this name, of course. Now we're going to specify a max length. Max length basically specifies the max number of sequential characters that the input will be able to enter the input field. So since this is first name, we're going to put 10. And lastly, we're going to put required at the end. Required is basically going to make it so the user must enter something into the input field, otherwise the form will not submit. Now we're going to create the submit and reset buttons. So to create the submit button, we are basically going to type in input type equals submit, and then value, which is what we're going to see on the web page, submit. Then we're going to create an opening closing button tag, because button tags can also be used to create submit and reset buttons. So in this case it's going to be button type equals reset, then within the opening and closing tags we're going to put reset. Okay. Now we're going to save all of this, see how it shows up in our browser. Okay, so here we have first name, we have the form caption, form number 1. So for the first name, let's input something like Tommy. Okay, here it shows up in the URL bar. So we know that everything has been submitted successfully. Let's enter something like Victoria. Also submitted successfully. We input something and then we put reset. As we can see, it'll just disappear, whatever it might be. But then let's say we want to enter a longer first name, like let's put King Charles. Oh, and see, I'm trying to input an S here, but I can't anymore because the max length is 10. Therefore, I will only accept this. Okay, so let's go back to the text editor now. Okay. Also, for a form, you can have something called a method, because as you saw before, everything we were inputting was basically showing up in the URL bar after we submitted the form, and that's not very good if we're trying to create a login portal, because we want users to feel secure with our website. They may want some privacy. Therefore, the default method is get, which makes everything show up in clear text in the URL bar, or we can use post. Post will get rid of this problem, because everything that we input and that is submitted will not show up in the URL bar. So launching this again, so let's input something like Emily. And so now we can see that Emily hasn't showed up in the URL bar. So we have succeeded in making that invisible. Now there is also something called a placeholder you can use for several different input types, like email or numbers or telephone, whatever it might be. But since this is a string, we can just put placeholder equals, and then let's put Joe here. So we're going to save this, check it out, and as we can see, in gray characters, we see Joe showing up here. If we enter something like, let's say, Max, it'll disappear. Julia, it'll disappear. Whatever we might want to put there. Also, I'd like to introduce the select tags to you. Basically what this will create is a drop-down menu. So if we put an opening closing option tag here, now value, we have to input a value, so let's put 1. And between these tags we're going to put the the option we want to have appearing on the actual web page. So let's put semester 1. Another option tag, value equals 2, semester 2, option value equals 3, and see, now that should create a drop down menu for us like that. So now you have a drop down menu, semester 2, semester 3, and notice that when you press reset, this will also reset to the default, to basically what first shows up. I know this is a simple aspect, but it just shows how helpful including the reset button is when creating an HTML form. Makes it a lot easier on your users if they're having trouble inputting info into your form for some reason. And what else should we go through? Oh yeah, and there's also called something a pattern we can use for our inputs. Pattern equals, we can put /d, and then let's put something like 8d. Basically what this is going to do is it's going to limit our user's input to these characters. Or let's say the input type was numbers or telephone or something like that. We could limit the input to several different numbers. So we can always do that. So yeah, the input, there are many different input types you can have, as was already mentioned. Color, you can even have a scroll bar. They come in handy if you're creating an online web store, if you're creating even a quiz online. You might want to use a scroll bar so that the user can input how strong she or he feels about a certain object or subject or whatever it might be. It's very useful. So I hope that you found my simple tutorial helpful. There's a lot you can do with HTML forms. Obviously we only included 2 input options in this tutorial, but obviously you could put more line breaks and put in more input types like email, like telephone number, put placeholders for those, select which ones you would like to require in your form, and so on and so on. And the form method equals post. You should also use that if you're creating a login portal. So I hope that you found my HTML5 form tutorial helpful, and keep on coding.